Now, magnum opus, if you think I'm picky, okay, if you think I'm picky about you following directions, you hadn't seen nothing yet till when you submit something for publication, okay? So really, I've done you a great service to prepare you for this in your life, all right? They get a lot of papers. They didn't get a lot of papers, I don't think, for writing for pictures, and I think the problem with that is people probably just weren't keeping up with the schedule. And my students do writing for pictures later in the year, so they didn't have papers to submit. But they'll get a lot of reports from people because reports are very popular assignments to do, okay? And so they get so many submissions that they don't even consider submissions that aren't done according to the guidelines, all right? And you will find this to be true anytime you submit something for publication. It's not just magnum opus. They're trying to give you a realistic picture of what it is to submit things for publication. Okay? All right. So unfortunately, the website is not up right now, and so I can't read them off. But I do have a very detailed email that I've sent every time, and I'll tell you the things that I remember about magnum opus. Okay. What kind of format do we use in MLA? They don't. And I think the reason they don't is because they're trying to, she doesn't want to have to go back and convert them for putting them in their publication. So you'll see when I send the web page for the reader, or whatever I send you for the writer's guidelines, that you have to single space your paper, not double space. I've made such a huge deal over you double spacing, right? Okay. So you'll single space your paper, and that's pretty easy if you had it double spaced with the formatting options, right? Mm-hmm. Hopefully you weren't like doing single space and hitting the interbar twice, because it'll be not quite so convenient for you. So what you have to do is highlight, highlight the whole thing, select the whole thing, and then just go in formatting and click single space. I think they have you just put the title and underline. They don't want all that stuff. My name will not be on it anywhere, okay? They're trying to give you a realistic, your mom's name is not going to be on it anywhere. Okay, I don't think they have you put the date on it. Also, they want you to take all the style indicators out. You know what I mean by style indicators? What? Right, take out the numbers, take out the underlines. Again, you should be able to select and get rid of the underlines. Taking out the numbers are a little bit trickier, but there is a find thing that you can do if you know how to do that. Mm-hmm. It's a little obscure. I finally figured out that's the easiest way to put your number, your brackets in, and to bold everything that you need to bold is to do that find thing. So you take out all the numbers and underlines. Don't have any highlights of your topics. Any special markings that you wouldn't normally see in a magazine, you're going to take out. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Since you have a works cited, you can include that, and they'll decide if they want to include that in the magazine or not. Seems to me like sometimes they have and sometimes they haven't. I guess it sort of depends on how much space they have, right? Now, another thing they're very particular about, and I really do need to put this on my checklist, is word count. You cannot have papers that are longer than 1,500 words. And since that means that you have 5 body paragraphs, you want all paragraphs to be approximately the same length, you don't need to be having a paragraph that's longer than 300 words. That's just way too long of a paragraph anyway. So if you're a voluminous writer, which I know somebody in here is, not saying any names, you need to go through and edit some of your stuff out, okay? Check your word count. I think they have a minimum word count too, So anyway, whatever the guidelines say that I send you, take that seriously, okay? Publishers aren't going to make a special case for anybody, all right? Now, they may edit some of your work. I have seen them do that with some of my students' work, because I knew for good and well that a student would send in a paper that had every single one of the style things in it, and then when I read them after they published them, I could see that some of the style things had been taken out and they had sort of redone it how they liked it. All right. Now, the other thing that I'll be sending you is either a copy of the document or a link to the document, which is a publication consent form. And this is, I guess, a legal thing for them so that they get your permission to publish your work without paying you. Okay? I don't know if they've had problems in the past or if some lawyer said, hey, you really need to take care of those. I'm not sure. But now, it wasn't like this when we started last year doing it, but now there's a form that you have to fill out. And it has some questions on it that have to be filled in, like what unit of writing this is. It's Unit 6, by the way. If I have a chance, what I'll do is fix up a special version of it and just send it to y'all. So what you do is you print the form, you fill out the form, you sign the form, your parent has to sign the form, and then you have to scan it back into your computer, and that has to be emailed along with your paper being emailed. Okay? All right. If you don't send the consent form, I asked the girl, her name is Megan. She's not that much older than y'all. She's just in her 20s. I asked her what we would do if the website didn't get back up, and she said, well, if it turns out that you can't get the website, she gave me the address that you can just email your paper, and she said, I'll get the consent form later. Now, let me tell you about publishing. If your paper does not get picked, it doesn't mean that you're not a good writer. It doesn't mean that you're not as good of a writer as somebody else. But a lot of it has to do with what they're particularly looking for their publication and for that particular kind of an assignment. Okay? Right? So if your paper doesn't get picked, that's not a sign that you should give up. Right? You should keep going. Did I tell you about my student last year who's a really, really, really good writer? And she submitted several papers and they haven't been published. Did I tell you about her? Okay. I mean, this girl's a really good writer. But she's joined a writing group, and most of the writers are adults. And they were kind of skeptical when her mother called and wanted to know, because she's only in, I think, maybe 11th grade. Her mother called to find out about the writing group, and they were really skeptical about, well, you know, this isn't a group for kids. This is for serious writing, blah, 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 blah. And her mother said, well, her teacher says she's an outstanding writer. And they said, oh, well, she can try it. She's just knocking their socks off. They are amazed with her writing. So just because she didn't get picked for magnum opus doesn't mean that she's not a good writer. She's still making an effort to submit, okay? So just because you don't get published the first time, the second time, or the 10th time that you submit something doesn't mean that you're not a good writer and then you shouldn't keep trying. Another thing that really helps to know is whatever you can find out about the group that you're sending things in for. So it's always a good idea to keep your audience in mind. What is the publication looking for? What are they interested in publishing? Okay? IEW, I can tell they're looking for very specific kinds of writing, and it just happens to be the kind of writing that we do in this class. Okay? Now, don't be overwhelmed by the corrections. I know that looks like a lot of corrections, but it's really not that bad. Okay?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Just go home, open up the paper that I gave you back, open up your document on the computer and just start going through and making changes. Now, if there's something that I say you left out, like your correct form on the works cited page, they don't care about that. Okay? Only the things that they list do they care about. Also, once you take out all those markings, unless you just made a grammar error with the dress-ups and the sentence types, I get the feeling that they're not going through and rigorously holding you to a religious word find of 6 different dress-ups, 6 different sentence types per paragraph. Okay? So if you just can't figure out another way to put that in only for this paper, I'm not talking about future papers for me, I'm talking about papers for magnum opus, then, you know, if it doesn't pop into your head, or if I haven't given you a correction, some of you, I actually, if you did something incorrect with a sentence type, I actually wrote in corrections. If I wrote in a correction for you, make that correction. Like if you had a wrong number 4, and I said fix as shown, you go ahead and make that correction, okay? I did that on some of the papers, and I have no idea who I did that for. So it might have been one of y'all, or it might have been not even anybody in this class. It might have been in another class. I don't know. So whatever corrections that I showed you how to correct it, go ahead and do it, because that'll help lock that into your brain, okay? But my main thing is I want you to send in your paper. It'll be a good experience for you. Make the corrections, send it in, okay? All right. Because I think my students can very well compete with anybody else's students, okay? Y'all are in a good position. You should be for your writing. Okay, now let's talk about, okay, I want to give you, there's still a lot of confusion over the way I want the heading done. All right, now let's talk about a new style thing. What style things have we learned the first semester? Okay, 2 categories. What were they called? Dress-ups and sentence openers, or sentence types, as I call them. IEW calls them sentence openers. But that got kind of confusing for people because the number 6 isn't really depending on what the sentence starts with, right? It depends on, what is the number 6 opener? Anybody remember?
BSS.
Yes. What is that? So really, number 6 depends on how many words, not the kind of word it starts with, right?
That's what I was kind of wondering.
Yeah, that's why I started calling them sentence types instead of sentence openers. Although sometimes I forget and call them sentence openers. But really, because the kind of word that you start a sentence with does change the type of sentence that it is. So both of those are correct. It's just that it isn't correct when it comes to the number 6. Okay? And I think everybody in here did really well on their style. I was really happy. So let's look at well, let me read something to you first. Hold on a minute. Here. Okay. I'm going to read 2 short little paragraphs for you. And then I want you to tell me which one is more interesting. Okay? All right, here's the first one. It was really cold and dark on the mountain. The weather was bad. Polly got scared. She wanted to go back, but she didn't. She kept going. Okay, here's number 1. Here's number 2. Polly had gone up the mountain in the rain and cold. There was a solid chunk of darkness from one end of creation to the other. The wind rose and fell with a muffled roar. The girl paused more than once, ready to flee back to the light and warmth she had left behind. Then, clenching her teeth, she would press on blindly. With the rain dripping from her hair and her skirts, her face and hands benumbed with cold, Polly struggled up the mountain path, feeling her way as best she could. Okay, let me read that first one again. It was really cold and dark on the mountain. The weather was bad. Polly got scared. She wanted to go back, but she didn't. She kept going. So what's the difference between the first one and the second one?
The second one's more descriptive.
Ta-da! Description. That's exactly right. So when you hear the weather was bad, I have an idea of what bad weather is, but I wouldn't have known this about the weather. The wind rose and fell with a muffled roar. The rain was dripping from her hair and her skirts. Her hands and feet were benumbed with cold. Okay, that tells me what exactly kind of bad weather they were having, right? Okay. Polly got scared. She wanted to go back, but she didn't. Okay. Here's what the second one says. The girl more than once paused, ready to flee. I love that word. Back to the light and warmth she had left behind. And clenching her teeth, she would press blindly on. Okay. So in one, we did a basic outline of exactly of what's happening with no specifics at all. In the second one, we can sort of feel the struggle and how unpleasant and uncomfortable it was for Polly, right? I really like this. This really describes how dark it was. There was a solid chunk of darkness from one end of creation to the other. Okay? So, what we're going to work on now as a style thing, which this is not in IEW, they do promote this by wanting you to use quality adjectives and strong verbs, but I want to make it a little more particular about what I mean by description. So let's turn to page 60 in our handbook. All right. Descriptive writing tries to paint a picture in the reader's mind and to give readers sensations. Now, probably in 4th grade science or 5th grade science, you all learned about the 5 senses. What are the 5 senses? Smell. I think one of y'all said smell. Touch, smell, sight, hearing, taste. Okay. So descriptive writing tries to use words of your senses so that your reader gets a sense of what's really going on. Does that make sense? Also, emotions play a large part in descriptive writing too. The first one I read said Polly was scared. The second one said she paused more than once, ready to flee back to the light and warmth she had left. Then she would clench her teeth and press blindly on. Okay? That girl was scared. You get a better sense of it, right? Because they're describing what she's doing, the pressure of her teeth clenching together, pausing. Okay? So that's what descriptive writing does. Let's look at a couple more examples. This is an excerpt from Treasure Island. Have any of y'all read Treasure Island? Yeah. Okay. So this is Treasure Island. When we were about halfway through, I suddenly put my hand upon her arm, for I had heard in the silent, frosty air a sound that brought my heart into my mouth, the tapping of the blind man's stick upon the frozen road. It drew nearer and nearer while we sat holding our breath. Then it struck sharp on the inn door, and then we could hear the handle being turned and the bolt rattling as the wretched being tried to enter. And then there was a long time of silence, both within and without. That's kind of spooky. Notice how he does it, though. He talks about the cold, the temperature. Those are actually touch words, believe it or not. He talks about sound words, tap, tapping. You can see the words in black, bold black print. Those are the descriptive words. Okay, now I have never read Dragon Wings. I don't even know what kind of a book it is. Has anybody here ever read it? But this is a really descriptive paragraph that I found. It was a night when the thick fog drifted. Can you see that? Doesn't that bring a picture to your mind right away? Through the streets, and I could not see more than an arm's length before me, and everything seemed unreal, as if I was asleep or dreaming. The gas lights showed in the fog only as dull spots of light, like ghosts hovering. A building would appear out of the grayness and then disappear. The whole world seemed to have become unglued. If ever there was a night for monsters to be out, this was the night. Okay. Mostly he uses what sense to describe that scene? Sight. Right. Okay. Now this was written, this is nonfiction writing by a man named John Muir, who was a conservationist, very early conservationist who did a lot of work in California. He did a lot of writing about nature in Yosemite Valley. So this is his description of an earthquake one night. And he uses sounds of sight, touch, and sounds. At 2:30 of a moonlit morning in March, I was awakened by a tremendous earthquake. And though I had never before enjoyed a storm of this sort, that's kind of a funny way to put it. I would have been terrified. I wouldn't have been enjoying it. This strange, thrilling motion could not be mistaken. The shocks were so violent and varied and succeeded one another so closely that I had to balance myself carefully in walking, as if on the deck of a ship among waves. I've never been in an earthquake. Have you, y'all?
For like 5 seconds.
Oh, 2 years ago during the ice storm?
That counts as an earthquake.
Yes.
Oh, it was, but I didn't feel it.
I felt it. I was sitting
I was
down here in front of the fireplace.
It counts as an
It
earthquake.
does. It was scary, just that few seconds. I was sitting down here. We have this little fold-out couch that we can sit on in front of the fireplace. And we use it when we're not having class. And my son and his girlfriend were up in the living room. And my husband was upstairs. And sometimes when people come down the stairs in this house, it's really loud. And you can feel some vibrations if they run, which people in my family are always running and then falling on the stairs. Okay? So I just thought somebody was running and falling, and I was like, what is he doing up there? I was saying that to myself right then, and all of a sudden my son goes, Mom! And I said, what? He said, did you feel that? And I said, yeah, what is going on? He said, I don't know. I think it was an earthquake. And I was like, oh, right.
I didn't think it was an earthquake either. I thought it was like, we had like a generator. And I thought like the generator was just vibrating so much that it started vibrating the house. Like, was that
Yeah,
the
we had a
generator?
generator too. Yeah, so, okay, so I didn't get to experience that.
You didn't get to experience an earthquake?
Walking on a ship, the deck of a ship among waves. It wasn't quite that.
I've done that.
Yes. For a minute or two, the shocks became more and more violent, as if nature were wrecking her Yosemite temple and getting ready to build a still better one. It was a calm, moonlit night, and no sound was heard for the first minute or so. Save low, muffled, underground, bubbling rumblings. I like that pile of words on top of each other. That sounds like an earthquake, doesn't it? And the whispering and rustling of the agitated trees as if nature were holding her breath. Then suddenly, out of the strange silence and strange motion, there came a tremendous roar. The Eagle Rock on the south wall, about a half mile up the valley, gave way, and I saw it falling in thousands of the great boulders I had so long been studying, pouring to the valley floor in a free curve, luminous from friction, making a terribly sublime spectacle, an arc of glowing, passionate fire, 500 feet span, as true in form and as serene in beauty as a rainbow in the midst of a stupendous, roaring rock storm. I'd like to see that for myself. It sounds pretty awesome, doesn't it? Okay, so I wouldn't have any idea. What if he had just said, the earthquake was really strong and a lot of rocks fell and made a lot of noise and some light. We wouldn't have any idea really of what it looked like, but we can sort of get an idea of what it looked like, can't we? I wonder how long it took him to write those 2 paragraphs. I wonder if they just sort of, if he was such a good writer and he practiced so much that he just kind of spun them out, or did he labor and suffer and sweat over them? What do y'all think? Okay, so color is another great set of adjectives that you can use in writing, and because most people can see color and it's part of their world, and so it helps it become more real to them. So instead of saying, for instance, the leaves were reds and oranges, you might say the leaves gleamed red and orange like flames of flickering fire. Gives you a little more picture, doesn't it? So let's look page 79 through 85 for some of the words that we can use for describing. I've got tons of them, and they're separated into categories. They first started out with a list from somebody else's work, but I went back and redid these a few years ago, and I like to have never come out alive. I got so trapped in coming up with more words and more words and more words and refining my lists, and I ended up spending half the summer on it. It was ridiculous. Okay, so when we talk about sounds, we can describe human sounds. We can describe animal sounds. Sometimes you might use an animal sound for something that isn't an animal, you know? Loud sounds, quiet sounds, musical sounds, nature sounds or sounds that objects make, okay? Now, if you come up with some really good descriptive words of your own, what I'd like for you to do is write them down here under add your own. And then you can share them with us, okay? Right? So usually the words up at the top are not good words. So for instance, loud would not be a descriptive word. What kind of a loud sound was it? I mean, there's a big difference between the loud sound of a gun going off and loud sound of a bunch of boulders falling in an earthquake, right? One is kind of a cracking sound, if you've ever been around guns very much in your life. And I've never actually heard rocks fall, but I can sort of imagine them. Sort of. So, you know, there's a big difference between a mother screeching, which when my son imitates me, he screeches, and a mother hollering, right? One is kind of like, or maybe bellowing. I love the word bellowing. That's listed under animal sounds, but I've actually bellowed a few times in my life, even though I'm not an animal. But if I screech, yeah, that means I'm scared, probably. You know, stop it! Get down from here! Okay, next page, sight. Whoa, the words for sight are just, and y'all, these are not the only words. This is just the tip of the iceberg, okay? Sight words. How surfaces of something appears. It might look dusty. It might look wavy. It might look hairy. It might look bubbling or bubbly, okay? Bright light has a different set of words than low light. You ever notice the difference between how things look when the light's really, really low? They sort of lose their color. The edges are not as sharp, okay? So there are words that have to do with bright light, and there are words that have to do with low light. Then there are words that have to do with how light is reflected. Either it's clear, or you ever seen the headlights turned on in the fog and how the light reflects back at you instead of just keeping going then when the sky is clear. There are sight words that describe shape. There are sight words that describe movement. Okay? As in you looking at something moving, how it moves. Does it move in a jerky way or does it move in a smooth, gliding way? Okay, now here's piles and piles of color words, but these are not all the color words that there are. There are more than this. There's a difference between Ferrari red, Georgia red, and Alabama red. Okay? I probably couldn't distinguish between Georgia and Alabama red. Can anybody here? Anybody watch the game last night?
I watched part of it. I don't know who won though.
Alabama.
Oh,
Alabama
good.
won.
Good.
Yeah.
I can't stand Clemson. It's just I just never been a big fan of orange.
Oh, see, I love orange. But I'm not really a Clemson fan. But I'm not really an Alabama fan either. Although I do like what I've read about Bear Bryant, their greatest coach. So. Well, I grew up in the football. I grew up in football from 7th grade through my 2nd year of college. I was in the marching band. So I was in the Georgia Redcoat marching band. So you know where my loyalty lies. But I hardly ever watch football anymore. I do love football though. Okay, got lots of different colors. Okay, so you know, if you're going to describe something as being white, try to be a little more descriptive. Is it a pearly white? Is it an oyster white? A cream color? Marble. A marble white is kind of usually grayish and sometimes even pinkish tones in it. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just a pure white. So there's all kinds of color words you can use. Color words are great. All right. So let's look at touch words. Now, did you know that there are 6 different types of touch? You'll see more than 6 categories on this next page. But that's because I broke down some of the types of touch. There are tactile sensations. That's what we usually think of touch, what something feels like when you touch it. Okay? But there are also there's also pressure touch. There are heat sensors in your fingers that detect how much heat is in something. There are pain touch receptors. And there are, wetness is one of them, I'm not sure. So, don't just say, it felt good. I mean, that is so lame. What did it feel like exactly? You know? It felt fuzzy. It felt silky. There's a difference, too, between describing how something feels when you touch it and how something feels like when you're just lying in your bed, right? You know what I'm talking about? When you're talking about pain, there can be pain that comes from the inside, or there can be pain that comes from the outside. So stabbing pain in your abdomen is not the same thing as you get when somebody stabs you. Right?
I wonder which one is worse.
Well, I think you would recover better maybe if it was a stabbing pain from inside of you. I'd rather not be stabbed.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So you've got to try. You've got to try to help your reader sense what you're meaning. Okay, now the weird thing about taste and smell is that even though they're 2 different sensations, they're very closely related. Does everybody in here have the sense of taste?
Yes.
Okay. Does everybody in here have the sense of smell? Yes.
No.
Not
No,
right,
I do.
Okay.
not right now, but
I have a friend, a past friend, I don't know where he is anymore, I don't even know if he's still in town, but he was not born with a sense of taste. He didn't have any taste buds. So he didn't drink coffee. He did not get it why people drink coffee.
It's like Well, the parents were probably surprised when they were handing them like baby food and they were just ate it all. Like ate it all. They would be like, it's like another.
Oh,
my baby
so
just won't
good.
eat any baby food. My baby will eat all
Eat
kinds.
everything. Okay, the weird thing about taste is it's very closely related to smell. So since my friend could not taste anything, things also didn't have much of a smell, because some of what you smell is really has a lot to do with the taste. Isn't that weird? Okay, so look at here. You'll see some words that are the same under sense as you do under food taste. Yes.
Well, my sister has a friend who was born without a sense of smell, but she couldn't taste anything either.
Oh, okay. It goes the opposite way.
And so, and she said that she was a vegetarian because if she tried to eat something like meat, like steak or pork or something like that, it would just taste really weird to her because she couldn't smell it.
Wow. Okay. All right. We can remember these stories, can't we? All right. So you see orangey appears under both food taste and sense. Let's see. Vinegary. There is a vinegary smell. You can actually describe something as smelling vinegary. Sometimes my son, who does not like vinegar, so he does not like salt and vinegar chips. Oh, I love it too. And do you like to eat vinegar on your fries? Yes, pickles.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
I do like pickles.
Now, the funny thing is he'll eat pickles. But he'll walk in, if I have like a vinaigrette on a salad or we're eating salt and vinegar chips or something, he'll go, oh,
Yes.
I can't stay in here. Why? It's that vinegar smell. So weird.
It's very like acidic also.
Extremely, yes. Okay, so what you have to do, whether you accept this mission or not, you still have to do it. If you look on your story checklist, wait a minute. Okay, it's under, I should have put it under style, but I didn't. Look up here at the top. It says, in the top section where it says general, at least 5 descriptive, which doesn't necessarily have to be an adjective, descriptive words in each paragraph in underlined italics. So this is how you show me your words. You underline them. Yeah, that's a real good idea, putting a mark next to it because that shows it's something new. You underline it and you put it in italics so I can see that those are your 5 descriptive words, okay? I used to ask people to use them and nobody ever did, so then I had to start requiring them, you know? And this really comes in handy by the time you get to level 3 because you get used to writing descriptively. And usually this is not people's favorite thing to do. Unless you're just a person that just really enjoys writing descriptively already, you're probably going to find it hard, okay? So just look for some words on that's why I wait till stories. We don't even try to do it for you at stories because it's a lot easier to be descriptive in stories than it is to be in a report, right? Okay? So you can practice in stories, and then when you get to be doing essays, then you'll be a little bit more acquainted with it. Now, let's go back and start talking about stories again. Remember, we talked about this in our last class, page 37. So we do have a little story that we're going to be working on this time. And I think that today, instead of what I usually do, I'm going to go about this a little bit differently. Okay. So, in order to summarize or write a story, you've got to know what the 5 elements of literature are. And you're looking there on page 37 in the bold black print. Tell me what those 5 elements of literature are.
Setting,
Mm-hmm.
plot,
Mm-hmm.
conflict, theme,
Characters.
Right. Okay. Now, the confusing thing about it is the plot also has 5 parts. Okay? And some of those things you just said show up in the plot, like settings and character. They show up in the first plot stage, which is what we call the exposition. Remember I told you y'all it's kind of like curtains coming open on a stage, okay? And then we have the conflict that's introduced, and that is what? What is the conflict? Right, and the conflict's so important that it's an element of literature all on its own, that it shows up in the second stage of the plot. So you get the conflict introduced, and immediately you start having things happen because of the conflict. People say things, they think things, they do things to try to do what?
Resolve it.
That's right. They try to solve the problem, okay? And so then people keep doing stuff to try to solve the problem, and then we finally get to the highest point of action, and that's called the climax, and that's right before the problem gets solved. If you think about your favorite movie or your favorite book, it's the part where you're going, is he going to make it? Is she going to get away? Or, you know, whatever the problem is. That's the climax, the part where you're like, okay? And then, boom, as soon as it gets solved, either happily or sadly, the person dies, the person succeeds, they capture the bad guy.
The bad guy wins.
The bad guy gets away, because even though he was the bad guy, he was still the, what we call the protagonist, the main character. Okay? That is, that's where the tension starts falling out of the story. And that, right after that is what we call the denouement. Say that with me. Denouement. And that means that's where the unraveling of the story is, where you find out maybe some answers to some questions that you had. It explains. Mystery books are really big on denouements, right? Anybody here like to read mysteries? Yeah, that's where you find out. Maybe you figured out who done it and all that, but you didn't quite know how they did it. That's where you find that out. Okay? And then at the very end, the story's closed. Hopefully, some meaning to the story is either stated or it's implied, or you at least understand what the meaning of the story was. You don't get to the end of the story, hopefully, and go, that was dumb. What was that for?
Yeah.
Hate books like that. Don't you?
So many movies like that, too.
Yeah, especially now.
You know, movies without a plot or conflict?
Yeah. Yes. Very weak. So the more exciting the conflict is, the better ending you're going to end up with. Of course, we all want our hero to win, whatever that is. That doesn't always happen. As in Romeo and Juliet, where we'll be reading about that in a couple more. It might be next class. I can't remember right yet. Okay, so as we talked about earlier, I think, if you look on page 38, there are 5, you know, these story things break down into nice sets of 5. Have you noticed that? Okay, so there are 5 different types of conflict. We have man against man, where somebody's kind of struggling against himself. Maybe he's doesn't have the ability or the character to do what needs to be done, and he's fighting against himself to try to overcome whatever that problem is. Okay, it might be a story about a mountain climber. He's all, well, of course that would also be a nature conflict. Then there's man against nature or animal. So lots of times those nature kind of stories, there's somebody struggling against their own weaknesses, and they're also struggling against nature. Man against God or fate. Sometimes in the old Greek tragedies, you'll see this very clearly. You know, if y'all read any Greek tragedies for class, you'll see some of the classic Greek stories where the main character is being opposed by fate in the Greek stories. Man against, I said man against man. Man against himself is what I meant on that first one. Man against man is when there's somebody actively opposing them. Either the bad guy is the main character and there's a good guy opposing him, or there's a good guy who's the main character and the bad guy's opposing him. That's pretty standard in stories. Or man against society. There may be a whole group of people after someone. Can anybody think of a story like that? Anybody in here read Witch of Blackbird Pond?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's a good book.
All right. So was the lady really a witch?
No.
No. But was society opposing her?
Yeah.
And the girl that was trying to help her,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's an example of a man against society kind of story. And then we have the theme, which is why the story was written in the first place. So who in here has read Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn? Anybody read that yet?
I think I read it, but I'm not
One of
sure.
the best books in the whole world.
I don't think that's allowed in like public schools anymore.
Well, that's a shame.
It's a little. They claim it's like insensitive to some cultures.
Well, that's really a shame because what they're complaining about is the use of a racial word. But if you actually read the book, which I wonder if some of those people who want to ban it ever actually even read it, the main character, Huck, is struggling against his own prejudices that he learned from society about slaves. And he finally comes to the conclusion partway through the book, and I don't think it's all the way to the end, that he didn't care what people thought. They were wrong about his friend Jim, who was a runaway slave. You know, so it's really a very pro-equality book, even though it uses a term that was very common at the time. Okay, and so to exclude ourselves from reading things like that, I mean, it's probably the best American novel ever written. And so that's a real shame if somebody is prevented from reading that. Yes.
Didn't Mark Twain also write The Adventures of Tom Sawyer?
He wrote that first.
Was there ever a book where it's Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn? Because
Actually, Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn get together in the last few chapters of Huckleberry Finn.
Because I've seen a movie called The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn, so I was wondering.
I wonder if they kind of took them and combined them.
Yeah, probably.
Because at the end of the book, well, I won't tell y'all the ending, but they do get together again at the end of the book, and it's hilarious. That Tom is a sight, as my grandmother would say. So instead of breaking Jim out of prison, which he wasn't really in prison, he was sort of in a little shack, Tom wants to, like, instead of just opening the door and letting Jim go, Tom wants to go through this big, long rigmarole of sawing into the house. It's some of the funniest scenes in literature ever. So Tom he wants it to be dramatic. Okay? It's really great. Okay, so the theme of the book can be all kinds of stuff. So for instance, in Huckleberry Finn, basically it's a man against society book because Huck and Jim are running away. Jim's a runaway slave and Huck's running away from, I guess he thinks he's running away from the police. I don't know. He's really not. He's not being chased, but they're really against society and they meet all kinds of adventures along the way. But the theme of the book could be included as the generosity of human nature, pride and humility, survival and resourcefulness. There's all kinds of themes in that book. And also human integrity. Even though Huck is a really rough guy, he's very loyal, and loyalty is another one of those. He's very loyal and has a lot of personal integrity himself. You know, he's not just a common criminal. It's a wonderful book. You should read it. Read it before you get out of high school because you'll want to read it again several times after you're grown. I have. I think I've read it about 5 times. It's that good. Actually, it's more fun to listen to on a tape with a good narrator if you can find a copy. We did that on a family trip one time. Okay, so let's talk about our lesson today because we're almost out of time. And I just want to go right to our lesson instead of using what I usually use because I think it's more helpful. If you you start out with a really small story idea that has all the parts, then you can change it into a full-length story. Now, forget, who in here likes to write stories? You do? You do?
Ish. Like
I do.
You do? Okay. Who likes writing stories better than writing reports? Okay.
I think so. I've never really
Well,
written
see,
like a
wait,
story.
no.
I don't know.
Actually, never mind. Well,
They're both okay.
See, I like writing reports better than stories. I could never write a story until I started writing stories this way. I just couldn't think of any.
okay, never mind.
I don't know. I think reports maybe.
Well, I had my whole mind is just full of other people's stories, you know, which nobody told me that it was okay to take a story idea and write my own story from it. You know what? It's okay.
Yeah, you see that a lot.
Yeah, and it's a good way to practice writing a story. So, if you, I need my, okay, so I want you to see this little example here of the farmer and his sons. So look on page 107. What we're going to do is we're going to take a little bitty story and we're going to put it into a 3-paragraph story, and we're going to enlarge on each of the story plots. So let me just show you this example, and I'll show you an example of the story I read, and then we're going to work with the one that we're going to actually write from, okay? The Farmer and His Sons. Who's heard this story before? It's just a folk tale.
Actually, I heard it. I mean, I read it in a book.
Okay, a lot of famous stories just came out of just story ideas from these old folk tales, okay? It's said that William Shakespeare never really wrote an original story. He just took old stories and rewrote them. William Shakespeare wrote some of the most famous stories in the world. Was he cheating? No. The reason we have William Shakespeare stories and not those other stories is because his were really good. Okay? So here's the farmer and his sons. A hardworking farmer stricken by a fatal illness wished to be sure that his farm would continue to prosper and that his family would be taken care of. His sons were somewhat lazy, and he was afraid they would be careless in tending the land. He called them to his bedside and said, "My sons, there is a great treasure hid in one of my fields." The sons, after his death, took their spades and mattocks and carefully dug over every portion of the land. They were frustrated to find their treasure. However, because of their thorough plowing, the fields yielded an extraordinary and superabundant crop that year. The family survived comfortably. Finally, the sons realized that the treasure their father had spoken about was really the fruit of their own labor. Okay. What bothers you about that story? Anything?
And it's not much detail, and you don't really get invested in the characters and the problems that they have.
Right. Plus, I mean, what kind of fatal illness did this guy have? We don't know.
Cool.
What kind of farm was it? One year somebody rewrote this one. It wasn't the assignment. They asked me, please, could they rewrite this one?
I feel like I could rewrite this. I think it'd be fun to rewrite
They
this.
wrote it as a funny farm. It was pretty fun. Okay. Besides that, how many sons did he have?
It doesn't say. It says sons.
Yeah. And you know what? These sons are really not very nice. I mean, after his death, his sons run out and they start digging.
They're just,
Oh, he died.
They're just like he's like those last words like, "Sons, there's treasure here in the fields," and they just like really and just run out and just leave him for dead.
Get that impression, don't you? Okay.
Oh, he died.
Okay. So there's some potential here because there are hardly any details given.
Yeah.
You have a great opportunity, don't you?
I'm thinking about different stuff like that to make the story way funny.
Okay. So this is what you do. In our first paragraph, this is a very specific. Think about this for those of you that love to write stories and will find this very annoying, okay? Because you want to write a story as long as you want to write it. This is a 3-paragraph story. The paragraphs have to have very specific things in them. The first one is plot stage 1. And if you look at this little graphic right next to you, see that's the exposition. And what do we talk about in the exposition? The settings and the characters. Okay? So we ask ourselves questions. What's the setting? I mean, what kind of farm is this? Describe it. Who are the characters? Tell a little about them. Oh, give your characters a name. We're going to read the story that I wrote, and I really meant to go back and put some more stuff in it, and I forgot. But the characters, give them names. Tell how many there are. Okay? The second one is where we're going to find the conflict. The conflict. What was the main problem in the story?
He was afraid that his sons were going to take care of his farm.
Well, that could be the conflict.
His sons were lazy.
Well, that's part of the conflict. That created the conflict.
Maybe just wanted to pull a practical joke on them.
The conflict is what are the sons doing? What kind of problem are the sons trying to solve? Because he dies pretty soon into the story, so he can't be the main character.
What was it? They can't find the treasure.
Can't find the treasure. Is there treasure? Will they find the treasure?
No.
Is there a man against? What kind of conflict is this, you think? Who are they fighting against, really? They're fighting against themselves, because why? And nature. Well, in my story, they're not going to be greedy. But what are they that we know? Lazy. That's the problem. Right? These people are so lazy. Okay, so that's the conflict. They're lazy. It's man against man. Will they find the treasure? I mean, man against himself, excuse me. They're really fighting against their own sorriness. Y'all ever heard that term used for just being good for nothing and lazy? Sorry. That's what my grandmother was. He's sorry. That didn't mean that he was apologetic. That meant he was a lazy good for nothing. Okay. So they're going to start doing, and what do they do to try to solve this problem?
They dig.
They do. They actually work hard, right? And then the climax, you're like, ooh, are they going to find the treasure? Or at least they are. Ooh, are we going to find the treasure? You know they're not. And, or you think they're probably not. And then they turn over the last bit of soil and no treasure. And you think that's the end of the story. But that's really just the denouement. The unraveling, what happens as a result. Huge crops, right? Super abundant crops. Okay? All right, so let's read the story I wrote where I forgot to name the character. And don't follow my bad example. All right? All right. Let's look at page 122. And then we're going to quickly fill in some things on your story assignment. Okay. Now look at this. This is how your story will look. Actually, you know, it'd be better if my last paragraph was a little bit longer. But the paragraph should be pretty close to the same. In other words, I don't want to see your problem show up until your second paragraph, okay? And so that whole first paragraph, you need to be really just describing your characters and describing what the situation is that's going to make this problem really turn into a problem. Okay, so here's my story. I'll add the things that I left out so y'all just follow along with me, okay? In the region of Tuscany, have I ever mentioned that I just want to go to Italy so bad? Italy, that's where I want to go. Tuscany in Italy. It's a region. Most beautiful place in the world. In the region of Tuscany, see, you can put your characters wherever you like. That's the nice thing. That's the fun thing, okay? I want to go to Tuscany, so I put my characters there. And I read a lot about it. In the region of Tuscany, there once lived a hard-working farmer named Mario, because he's Italian, whose whole life had been spent tending the family vineyards, like his father and his grandfather and his great-grandfather before him. He nurtured the vines, lovingly cultivating and weeding around them each year so that they would flourish. It would never have occurred to him to leave his precious birthright in the care of a stranger. Accordingly, he led his family in hired hands. I like that part, the hired hands part. In the gathering of the grapes, it came to pass that 1 year after harvest time, the industrious man was stricken with cancer. There's the fatal illness. And he sensed that he did not have much time left to live. He fretted about the future. Unfortunately, his sons were the heirs of their father's estate, but not of his conscientious character. That's my favorite sentence in the whole thing. All efforts to instill diligence in them seemed to have failed. The boys worked when prodded, but they never took any initiative. They much preferred the Italian custom of visiting the local coffee house and socializing with their friends. That's because of the youth's carefree attitude. The farmer was afraid that after his death, his beloved vineyards would suffer from their lack of attention. He greatly desired that the ancestral estate would continue to prosper and that his family would thrive. Okay, so I have set the setting and the characters. These are not bad boys, okay? They will at least work when their father tells them to. All right? My boys are not going to be bad boys in this story. They're just a little irresponsible. Okay? All right. So, second paragraph where we get to the conflict and to the action. Calling them to his bedside, the farmer murmured, "My sons, there's a great treasure hid in one of my vineyards." The sons, I should have said how many there were, and I should have given them names. Maybe there were 3. Maybe their names are
Billy, Bobby, and
somehow that doesn't sound very Italian, but okay, we'll go with it.
Pasta, lasagna.
The sons glanced furtively at one another. Was the old man out of his head? Cautiously they pressed him for details, but soon the patriarch dozed, unresponsive. When they saw that they could not elicit any further information, the boys slipped out of the room and huddled in the hallway, pondering this intriguing news. Perhaps they were to live the rest of their lives as wealthy nobles. If so, the coffee house would be too common a place for such fine men. They would take their leisure in Florence, Rome, Venice. Meanwhile, they could hire plenty of servants to tend their property in their absence, since such coarse industry did not suit gentlemen such as themselves. Not long afterwards, the farmer died. His sons grieved exceedingly, for although they were somewhat irresponsible and unmotivated, they reverenced their father. After the period of mourning, they took their spades and mattocks and began cautiously to dig around all the vineyards, being careful not to disturb the vines. Day after day they searched. Their limbs ached by evening, for they were not accustomed to such continuous labor, yet they persisted. Their hands grew calloused, and their skin glowed bronze from the long days laboring under the sun. As time slipped by, they grew sturdy and strong through their exertion. Suddenly it was harvest time again. Every inch, this is the climax, every inch of the soil in the family's vineyard had been turned, yet no treasure had been unearthed. The youths groaned and complained in their frustration as they faced the toil of their own harvest. Where was their father's promised treasure? They had little time to contemplate their disappointment, as they were overcome by the immensity of the crop. Unexpectedly, because of their thorough cultivating and weeding, the vines yielded an extraordinary quantity of grapes. The family enjoyed their most profitable harvest ever. As they celebrated, the sons at last realized that their treasure was the result of their own diligent labor. Continuing the family tradition, they cared for the vineyards for the rest of their lives, just as their father had done. Okay, so I made this my story. One day, maybe my daughter will illustrate it for me. I would like that. Okay, let's see. Now let's look at your assignment. Now, if anybody really does want to write Farmer and Sons in your own way, you're certainly welcome to do that. But let's look at the one that I've given you to actually use. And this is on page 161. This is another old story. A lot of fun. The Boy Who Cried Wolf. Anybody heard it? Okay. There was once a young shepherd boy who tended his sheep at the foot of a mountain near a dark forest. You wouldn't have to put yours at a foot of a mountain near a dark forest. You could have it anywhere you want, but you've got to describe it, okay? And there's not much description here because, again, it's short so that you can put in details. It was rather lonely for him all day, and so he thought upon a plan by which he could get a little company and some excitement. He rushed down toward the village, calling out, "Wolf, Wolf," and the villagers came out to meet him, and some of them stopped with him for a considerable time. This pleased the boy so much that a few days afterwards he tried the same trick, and again the villagers came to his help. But shortly after this, a wolf actually did come out from the forest and began to worry the sheep, and the boy, of course, cried out, "Wolf, Wolf," still louder than before. But this time the villagers, who had been fooled twice before, thought the boy was again deceiving them, and nobody stirred to come to his help. So the wolf made a good meal off the boy's flock, and when the boy complained, The wise men of the village said, a liar will not be believed even when he speaks the truth. Okay, what's the problem in the story? Well, that was his way of trying to solve this problem. What was the problem he was trying to solve?
Lonely.
He was lonely, and in some versions he's just bored, right? Okay, lonely and bored. And so what I want you to do, and let's look at the little story chart right next to it, okay? Right there on the opposite page. In the exposition, we have the details of the character and the setting. Who's the main character? Unlike my story, please give the main character a name. Do not call him the boy 15 times. The boy, the boy, the boy, the boy, the boy. Okay? You can call him Billy Bob or whatever you said. What's his name? What's his job? Where and when does the story happen? Now, I have had people tending all kinds of stuff. I have had, it doesn't have to be sheep. I've had aliens tending, I don't know what, Chewbacca's or cookies, whatever, I have seen all kinds of things in The Boy Who Cried Wolf, okay? So it's up to you. It could be a space story. I've actually had stories written in castles. It was, a castle defender, a young guy who was given the job to, there's actually a famous story written by somebody that I can't think of right now, tending the castle gate, that lets down over the moat, while everybody else went out to do the exciting battles, right? And he was really bored, and he was supposed to be defending the castle from giants, and while he got bored, he started hollering giants, and then giants really came, and, Now, okay, so it doesn't have to be a village and a shepherd boy and sheep and wolves. All right? If you want to change it, you can. You don't have to. Got it? Okay? But the problem needs to stay the same. The person is bored, and it doesn't have to be a boy, it can be a girl if you want it to be. The person is bored, and so in order to get some excitement, they start yelling that whatever it is they're supposed to be watching for actually shows up. Anybody getting any ideas right now? Okay. So they start yelling, wolf, wolf, or alien, alien, or giants, giants, or I don't know. I've had some crazy things for stories. All right? And so what I want you to do is pick up your pen, and in big bold letters, I want you to write bored and lonely. Right here. Plot stage 2. Bored, lonely. I don't want to see anything about your person being bored until the second paragraph. Sometimes I've seen people put that in like the second sentence. There was a boy who was tending sheep, and he was bored. Like the first sentence. No, that's wrong, okay? That whole first paragraph, you're to be setting the stage for your audience. Don't tell me about him being bored. He can be an orphan boy. He can be a castle guard, like I said. He might be a bird, for all I know. Maybe it's like a bird community. Okay. Okay, but I don't want to see, but the problem has to stay the same. Bored / lonely. Okay, and don't talk about that until the second paragraph. All right? And then talk about what happens. And, put a little excitement into it. Don't go, and the boy said, help, help. And everyone came running. I mean, that's boring. All right? And then when you get to the last paragraph, the climax, whatever it is, shows up for real. Right? So, blank shows up. All right? right here. Whoever it is that he's supposed to be guarding against shows up. Right? Put that down. That's where it has to happen in the third paragraph. Does that make sense? Okay, there's a really interesting thing in where'd that one go? One of my students brought me a copy of Little House in the Big Woods. Oh, I think I took it upstairs. Do you remember the real life Boy Who Cried Wolf thing that happened in Little House in the Big Woods? It wasn't actually about a wolf. What was it?
I can't remember, but I do remember that part.
It's a boy named Charlie. He was. Have y'all read Little House?
Yeah.
Okay.
See the show.
Okay, well, Laura and Mary have a cousin named Charlie, and they go with their father. They go with their father to help bring in the hay because it's going to rain and the hay will get ruined if they don't get it in time. So Charlie is a real brat. He's their cousin. And so they're working, trying to get the hay in. And so Charlie starts screaming his head off in a field nearby. And Pa and Uncle, whoever he is, drops everything. And they go running to find out what's the matter with Charlie. And Charlie starts rolling on the ground. I fooled you good. And his father gets onto him, and Pa is like, so they go back to work, and then Charlie does it again. They all go running. And so the third time Charlie does it, what happens? Nobody goes. And Charlie screams and screams and screams and screams and screams. And finally, Pa and Uncle, whatever his name is, go to probably wear Charlie out. They probably had it at that point. And they get there, and he's just covered in yellow jackets. And he's been hopping up and down on a yellow jacket nest screaming that whole time. They had to, well, maybe he did. Maybe he did move, and they just went with him. And he's just covered, and so they have to, like, put mud plasters all over him, and he's all wrapped up.
Oh, I remember that.
Oh yeah, I remember like there's a picture in our book and he's like all wrapped up. He looks like a mummy.
Yeah. And Pa says, I think Pa says, serve the little liar right. And Laura was real confused because she didn't know how Charlie could lie when he hadn't said a word. So this story happens frequently because it's a real life thing that people do. They make stuff up in order to get attention, right? So you can have a lot of fun with this. Let's just look at one example, and I will not want your story to be like this, okay? But this will sort of give you an idea of how you put a story like this in 3 paragraphs. Okay, look on page 131. This is not from one of my students, and this is pretty short and to the point. Yours doesn't have to be this short. You can make it longer, but no longer than how many words per paragraph? 300. Well, 300 words per paragraph. And this is only 3 paragraphs, so that would be like 900 words.
Wait, did you say page 131?
131, yeah. Equal job rights equals problems. Tara, so don't use this story, use your own idea. And this person doesn't have anybody she's guarding and protecting. You'll see how it's a little bit different than the one you're going to be writing. Tara, who was a space miner in 2053, was often lonely. Out in space, there was nothing to do. Now, they have this stuff out of order a little bit, so I'm not really sure I should read it. What's wrong? What should they have done? Right. So don't copy that, but I just want to give you, it's a story idea, okay? Out in space, there was nothing to do. Sadly, she stared at the drifting asteroids. Suddenly, a diabolical ploy came to her because of her long, arduous training. She knew that she should not call Star Blaster Space Patrol unless it was completely necessary. She slammed her hand onto the alarmer. She painfully jerked her hand up. How gratifying it would be to see another human face, even if she did break her hand. The Space Patrol arrived. When he came in, she smiled. "I was waiting for you," she exclaimed. "What's the situation?" the tall, strong man asked. "How in the universe did you do that to yourself, woman?" When she told him the real reason, he feigned rage. Surprisingly, if you had looked into his heart, you would have seen that he was glad at the interruption in his mundane space chores. Tara sputtered her apology and promised never to do it again. Because of this, see, she should have developed Tara in her first paragraph, and she didn't. Amazing thought. Because of this, he refrained from reporting her. The next time he was not so kind. Amazing, Tara thought. When she received her reprimanding message, I didn't know my supervisor's face could be crimson. Her supervisor, who was mean, screamed at her about honor, competence, and pride, and of course he questioned her parentage. She laughed ironically. Although his words wounded her, she savored his anger. Between Supervisor 32908 and her was the void of space. She did not have to worry about him strangling her. On the ship Cassoulet, Tara was growing more and more lonely. Cautiously, she reached for the alarm. To be alone or to be in trouble? That is the question, she thought. She hit the alarm. Abruptly, a rock veered out of its orbit and smashed the ship. Tara, who was frightened, tried to strap herself in. Being too late, she was already crushed against the bulkhead. All power vanished as the damaged ship thrashed about. Because she was injured, she could only drag herself back to her chair. Terrifying her most was the memory of the story, the boy who called Banta. When she received the message, she used all remaining power to view it. She was fired! Now she was utterly jobless. Tara was not surprised. She had suspected for a long time she had been hired only to meet the ratio between Earth males and Mars colony females. That was the problem with EJR 2027, Equal Job Rights, made a space law in the year 2027. Okay, so she wasn't fighting against anybody. She was just sort of fighting against her own self because she was bored and lonely, right? I guess she was defending something. But see, they didn't tell us in the first paragraph what she was defending. But do you see how it's the same story, except not very well developed, but a different setting. There is another one in here. Oh, the lie that led to loneliness, 129. Ooh, I gotta let y'all go. Okay, now this one is done correctly. All right, this one does 129. Excuse me. This one is done correctly. It does have a conflict in the second paragraph like it's supposed to be. There was once a tiny mouse named Luigi who was too weak to carry much weight. Therefore, his job was to be the lookout for cats, which he thought was unimportant. He and his mischief of mice lived in the narrow walls of a Wisconsin cheese factory. Here, cheese was plentiful. In the factory, there were many mice because it was such an enormous factory. Unfortunately, there were lots of cats stalking the factory as well. Knowing that most of the cats were lazy, the mice could easily obtain cheese. Since there was one cat named Bowser who was not so lazy, the mice still had to be careful. Although mice had only tiny little Luigi for a lookout, it was relatively safe. One extraordinarily uneventful day, Luigi decided to have a bit of mischievous fun. Okay, and it goes on from there. You can look and see what they said. This one is mice looking out for cats, right? Okay, now I'm pretty sure I sent you a list that you could print, a keyword outline. I want you to fill out this form, but I sent you a printable one, okay? Just make sure that when you print it, you go ahead and write bored and lonely and blank shows up, whatever it is, okay? And then you write, once you write your keyword outline, you write each paragraph from that with all of the style and everything. So does everybody kind of have a good grasp of what it is we're supposed to be doing? Okay, I'm really looking forward to reading these stories. It's going to be fun. So y'all have a good time with it, and please keep in mind that I would like to be entertained. Okay? I'll be sending you the magnum opus stuff as soon as they get the site back up, okay? If they don't get it back up, I'll send whatever I can get my hands on in the next week or two. All right? Okay, your parents are probably thinking I kidnapped you, so y'all better run. Bye. Please call me if you have any questions. This is very different from what we've been doing, okay?
Okay.
All right?
Sure.